The main thing that frustrates me is the same thing that frustrates people about the Clintons, politically. It's a triangulated, focus-grouped, lowest common denominator creation, saying all the nice comfortable words calculated for mass appeal combined with the stamp of approval of the political elite. It gives simplified, children's bedtime story explanations of complicated moments of history and complicated issues of politics. Now, don't get me wrong. You kind of need something for the masses. Islamic history, particularly the early centuries, was a path of tears. It's hard to drink straight up and keep the faith for a lot of people. The Prophet's body is still warm and being prepared for burial, and people are already arguing over who gets to lead. The first caliph, frustrated that Muhammad's daughter and son-in-law refused allegiance, sends an aggressive mob to their door to secure compliance. One of the members of that mob was the second caliph. He threatened to burn the house down with everyone inside. Enthusiastic about the faith, but rough and unnuanced with people, he is later murdered by one of his slaves. The third caliphate is a mess of corruption and nepotism. All the chief spots go to his scheming relatives, who walk over the caliph and make the caliphate their personal ATM and playground. He is murdered in a general revolt. The fourth inherits the aftermath, including the first all-out Muslim civil war a mere 40 years after Muhammad's death. This war was with the third caliph's crooked family. This fourth caliph was assassinated, while praying, in Ramadan. The rebellious family of the third caliph later takes power by force and backroom deals, and turns the caliphate into a family dynasty, the Umayyad dynasty, that openly murders the Prophet's grandson before triggering a counter-reaction that eventually overthrows it. That's some heavy stuff right there. Sunni orthodoxy sweeps this under the rug. Everyone that met Muhammad was equal and they were all virtuous and loved each other, and it was a hippie love fest because all their human frailties were magically overcome by the influence of Islam. The first four caliphs before the dynasty were righteous caliphs, and it was all as God intended. That's a beautiful story if you're trying to proselytize to people. It's a total lie, but it definitely markets better than the unvarnished historical truth. People's opinions will differ, but as far as I'm concerned, the Shia perspective offers a more satisfactory, reality-based explanation of early history. Or the Sunni political theory, or rather lack thereof. The people that assembled and standardized Sunni orthodoxy looked back on the early mess of civil wars and revolutions and bloodshed and upheaval and just said, listen, everything is preordained by God. If someone becomes your leader, it is God's will, and it's wrong to question it, even if the leader is a violent scoundrel that violates every principle of Islam. Yours is not to question. Yours is to obey. Disobeying the leader is disobeying God's choice. To be charitable, it means well. We know that revolutions often end up revolving around 360 degrees, with the new guy becoming just as bad as the old guy. And we know that often a crummy stability is better than anarchy. But still, it's problematic. Where does free will fit in this notion that it is God's chosen predestination? Where in here is a workable nuanced doctrine of when to have forbearance in the name of social order, and when is enough, and how you go about morally overthrowing a rotten government? Nowhere. There isn't really a foundation for an organic, Islamically based theory of political resistance within Orthodox Sunni Islam, given the emphasis on fatalism and obedience to leadership. A lot of it had to be imported and repackaged from the West. Revolutionary leftist political philosophy. Anti-colonialism. Political Shiism also had to do a bit of such import to help bridge any gaps between historical precedents and modern realities, but there was more there in terms of authentic Islamic roots to graft onto, and you end up with a more nuanced and effective final product. There are all these examples over centuries of great men and women resisting in all sorts of different overt and covert ways depending on the context and situation. And again, don't get me wrong, this is not to demonize Sunnis. They are Muslims, they value Muhammad, the Quran, pray, fast, go on Hajj, give charity, and their numbers make Islam a bigger deal worldwide. I respect them for that. But still, these things I mentioned are frustrating. As a Shia Muslim, the following beliefs held by my Sunni brethren are frustrating and illogical. The belief that we should never doubt the piety and sincerity of all the Sahabas evident by the fake hadith attributed to the Prophet that my companions are like stars etc., even if they called each other infidels and went into wars and ultimately killed one another as in the battles of Jamal and Siffin. The belief that the Prophet left without choosing a successor for the Ummah, while if we look at previous prophets they all ensured a successor was announced and clear instructions given to their followers. The belief that the wives of the Prophet like Aisha and Hafsa are unquestionable and no one should utter a word about their actions and sins, even if Aisha's clearly disrespected the Prophet many times during his lifetime and after his death rose against the caliph of her time Hazrat Ali as in the Battle of Jamal and resulted in thousands of Muslims dying as a direct consequence of her action. The belief that a caliph is chosen by election. If we were to look at how Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman were made caliphs, then it's a different method each time, so there is a clear contradiction on the idea of electing a caliph regarding the three most important caliphs. The belief or lack of belief in imamate and the fact that they can't name the 12 caliphs after the Prophet as mentioned in Sunni Sahih hadiths, and they certainly can't name the imam of their time as mentioned in their books too. The belief that they love and respect the Ahlul-Bayt and the Sahaba both. Clear contradiction is evident by history that the Sahaba such as Muawiyah clearly oppressed the Ahlul-Bayt. The belief that it's sufficient to follow the Quran and Sunnah, while this hadith isn't mentioned in any major Sahih books, rather what's mentioned is to follow the Quran and Ahlul-Bayt as.